Okay. So, before I get started, I just want to do a brief introduction as to why I'm doing these talks. Typically, in your average year, I will have kind of 5 cases that might involve kids, and that can be any age from kind of babies to teenagers. When I say kids, I use that to refer to anyone under the age of 18. Um, and this month, or within the last month, I've had 5 bite cases with children, 4 of which came up in the same week. And I wanted to stop that because it's not very fun for me. Obviously, not very fun for the dogs, not very fun for the parents involved. And it's all just very stressful. And I want to start preventing it as much as anything else. I think, from what I have been told about all of the cases, that as we leave lockdown, things are other things that we've been in lockdown for realistically kind of 3-4 months. Things that we did to manage and prevent issues occurring beforehand are now not happening because we're starting to have other aspects of our daily life jump in again, like getting the kids dressed and ready for school and getting them out the door. And because of that, we're losing some of the management. And that seems to be where it's all creeping in. So I thought, whilst we're still coming out of lockdown, I'm going to try and do as many of these talks as I can, just to remind everyone to keep management in place, to give you some ideas for management, and to give you some things to look out for. Because even if you've got kind of young kids now, there are problems that can jump in when they're teenagers and things like that. So I'd much rather I'm trying to help prevent as many problems as I can, basically. So when it comes to children being bitten, generally when it comes to dog bites in total, more children are bitten than adults. And the bites to children are more severe because they tend to be to the face. Do- uh, Children are kind of at dogs' mouths levels for the most part. And adults tend to be bitten on the hands or the arms versus anything else. It kind of when an adult is bitten, generally it's because they've said hello to a dog that didn't want to be said hello to. When children are bitten, it can be because they've jumped on a dog or they've been playing with a dog and it's escalated. And quite often, hands are below the mouth height of the dog and the face is what's closest. So bites to children are more severe because they are in a more delicate body area, and that the skin on our faces, especially the skin on children, is a lot thinner anyway, so it's going to cause more damage if a child is bitten anywhere, but especially to the face. Your face is more delicate. Even bites to the face on adults cause more damage than bites to the hands and things like that, because our hands are used to it, or used to kind of we've got rougher skin on them. Another thing that I want people to be aware of is that young teenage girls tend to be bitten on the face significantly more than any other kind of demographic. And that is because young teenage girls like to cuddle dogs. I say we, I'm not a young teenage girl anymore, but when that is the reason a dog was bought for me, is because I needed something that I could cuddle and like play with. Fortunately, Pumbaa is a dog who can tolerate that, and he's always been very clear about how to tell me when enough is enough. And I've never had any problems with him. But if you had a dog like Timon, for example, and that was forced upon him, I have no doubt that he would have bitten me if it was forced. Luckily, my mum kept an eye on it all, and we made sure that I was never in that position with Timon, and he was never in that position. But it's important to realize that there are risk factors, and being a young teenage girl with a dog in the house that she's very cuddly with is a massive risk factor. So that's why I'm kind of covering everything from babies through to teenagers, because there are so many factors that you need to look at and be aware of as kids grow. So even if you've got a young child now, this talk will still be helpful for especially if you've got young girls, for when they become teenagers with your dog. There was something else I was going to say and it's just run away. Nope, I'll have to come back to that when it comes back to me. Right, so I'm going to start kind of from babies and build up. Now, generally when babies are really, really young, we don't want to push interactions with dogs. We want to make sure that they are we let it happen naturally. Babies tend to make a lot of loud noise. They tend to move in unpredictable ways. And if you've got a dog with any form of prey drive, you need to appreciate that a baby looks like a squirrel in some ways, and they can behave in ways that prey behave. So it's really important to make sure that if you've got a dog who you've ever seen chase squirrels or rabbits or anything like that, that you bear in mind they may have that same association to your baby, and that's obviously not what we want to happen. So when it comes to children and babies, never leave a dog alone with a baby. And I mean, that should happen with toddlers, children, and teenagers as well. But it is crucial that you never, ever, ever leave a dog alone with a baby. Management is really your best friend there. We don't want to be forcing interaction with the baby on the dog, and we don't want to be forcing interaction with the dog on the baby, because sometimes children are scared of dogs as much as the dog is scared of them, or isn't, as the case may be. You want to take it nice and slow. Don't push to get cute family photos or anything like that. Don't worry about kind of forcing an interaction to happen. Take it nice and slow. Keep it nice and calm. We don't want high energy kind of situations happening here. We want to keep it as calm as possible. Nice. It kind of almost like as if you're all sat on the sofa in an evening watching TV. That's the sort of energy level we're going for when it comes to dogs interacting with babies or not. One thing we can do to help out, especially if you've got a dog who's nervous, or if you've just brought a child home, a baby home, is Pavlov's breakfast, which is designed by the School of Canine Science. And essentially that gives your dog an opportunity to smell the baby, but without the baby being involved. So we're going to take a bit of clothing that the baby's worn, and we're going to lay that next to the dog's food bowl when we present their food in the morning. If you can do this prior to the baby coming home from the hospital, that's amazing, because your dog's had an opportunity to smell them and kind of get to know them without them being there, so that when they are there, they just kind of go, oh, okay, that's what that smell is, and they can move on with their day. Now, some people, whenever I mention Pavlov's breakfast, they get concerned that the dog will associate the smell of, I use this for cats as well, so the smell of the cat with eating. And no, not necessarily. What we are doing with Pavlov's breakfast is changing the emotion associated with the scent. And the scent is the emotion that comes along with it is essentially a good emotion. So it's not necessarily related to the behavior of eating. So yes, we are presenting it at food time, but no, the behavior that your dog associates with the scent will not be eating. It will be the emotion that they feel when they're eating, which is generally quite a nice emotion. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty happy when I'm eating. So that's something that we can do prior to baby ever coming home. But even if your baby's already home, that is something you can do kind of straight away, and you can't overdo that one. That is one that you can absolutely do kind of regularly throughout your dog's life, and might be worth doing as your child starts to enter adolescence, where hormones are going to change how they smell and things like that. That's quite helpful to kind of help your dog get used to that change, but without your child necessarily being involved in that process. Because when the child is involved in the process, generally the child can be bitten. That's what I was going to say. Back to stats and kind of general information on dogs and who's most likely to be bitten. Every dog is capable of biting. Your dog has a mouth, therefore they are capable of biting. So many people, and they can be perfectly nice, friendly family pets. There need not be something wrong with a dog that bites. And it doesn't mean the dog's nasty or anything like that, but every dog is capable of biting, and dogs can't use words. So the only defense mechanism they have is their teeth. And it's really important to understand that. So if a dog is pushed too far, no matter how friendly the dog, no matter how far they have to be pushed to get to that point, eventually the only thing they will have left is to use their teeth. So it's very important that parents are aware of that and respectful of it, and they don't let the dogs get to that point, because that's not fair on your dogs. Especially some dogs who kind of warn and they try to say, please don't do this, look, please stop, and they're as polite about it as they can be, but they're pushed to a point where biting is the only thing that they have left within their repertoire of saying, look, leave me alone now. Right, back to babies and dogs. Sorry for that brief skipping backwards and forwards. Another thing we can use with babies is protected contact. Now, protected contact is typically in the training world used to refer to training horses or zoological animals like tigers and things like that, in order to keep the human safe. However, we can use protected contact within the home to train both baby and dog how to be around one another, how to observe each other, get to know one another, and kind of experience each other, but without the possibility of causing one another harm. So, protected contact could be a crate that your baby cannot access by sticking their fingers in or anything like that. Or it could be like a pen. So you can buy metal pens that have individual panels that you can kind of adjust to the size of the room that you need. And what I would recommend is almost a double pen. So you've got a pen one side, a pen the other side, and a gap in the middle that does not allow for baby fingers to be stuck through. Preferably, we don't want to let the baby stick their hands through at all, but I appreciate that sometimes life happens, and we want to make sure that we're preventing life happening at every turn. So if we've got that little gap, it need only be that much. That stops any possibility of fingers being stuck through where they shouldn't be stuck through, and dogs nipping something that actually we may not want them to be nipping. And whenever the dog and or baby are being exposed to each other in protected contact, essentially what we want them to do is to be chilling out. Now, babies, I appreciate, do baby things, and baby things are fine. If you've got a dog who's pretty solid for the most part, but you just want them to get used to experiencing baby, and baby can be kind of on a play mat, on the floor, in a chair, having a play with another family member or something like that. And someone can be sat on the dog side, just kind of cuddling them, doing what you would do. So let's say it was kind of in the evening and it's how you want to be interacting in the evening. It would be just kind of you chilling out watching the TV whilst baby is present with other family members and you're chilling out with the dog, sort of thing. So we've got the dog one side just relaxing. We don't necessarily want to make the dog's element of it a training situation, because otherwise the dog may learn that whenever baby is around, it's a training opportunity. And they're not actually going to be relaxing. They're going to be waiting for you to give them cues. They're going to be expecting behavior. They're going to be expecting reinforcement. And that can build frustration in. And actually, that's not what we want. We're trying to teach both parties to coexist happily. Now, by happily, I kind of mean, can you be in the same room and pretty much ignore each other? That is the bare minimum that we're asking for. If we get anything better, awesome. If we get anything worse, absolutely call in some professional help in the form of a dog trainer or behaviorist, because the consequences, if that goes badly, are not worth thinking about. So when you do any kind of protected contacts interactions, try and keep them as close to real life as you possibly can. Imagine your real life or your ideal scenario with the dog in your head, and simply put 2 gates in the middle so that your dog can't access your baby and your baby can't access your dog. Another thing you can do prior to, or kind of as baby comes home, is start to prepare your dog for less exercise, and kind of go out for baby walks, as in walks a baby could handle, versus kind of their normal exercise routine, and perhaps expose them to more noise, especially baby noises. So if you have any loud baby toys or kind of mechanical baby toys, those are great things to be exposing your dog to before baby comes home, even if it's just that they're on in the background. And you can also play there are many apps and YouTube soundtracks available that are just baby noises, kind of babies crying, babies screaming. Those are things well worth exposing your dog to prior to them being connected to your baby, so that your dog doesn't startle when he hears the baby crying or screaming or anything like that. And they're things that your dog just comes accustomed to and is part of its life, versus something that comes along with this baby that looks a little bit like prey, smells a little bit funny, and is now taking up all of mum and dad's attention. So that's kind of everything that we can do with babies. Obviously, how you work with protected contact is going to look quite specific for you guys. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to ask me at the end, or if you want to shoot me an email, please do. It's emma@pawbypawtraining.co.uk. I'll pop that in the comments as well, or in the caption as well, so that you can contact me if you'd like to. Now, toddlers and dogs. Toddlers are a fun one, because they start to interact a lot more. They start to be a lot more interested in dogs. However, they're hard for dogs to deal with. Toddlers are really difficult. And I own 2 dogs who are reactive to children and kind of anything young. As a result of poor socialization, I incorrectly socialized them when I was trying to, before I was a dog trainer. That's how I thought socialization occurred. And still to this day, toddlers are things that my dogs struggle with. They can be in the presence of children. They can be in the presence of teenagers, for sure. Babies, I don't think they've been in the presence of babies, certainly not anytime recently, but I think babies would be easier for them to handle over toddlers. If we see toddlers out and about, I have to keep my space, make sure that I'm working really hard with my dogs, and I'm very careful about how close I get to toddlers, because it's not fair on my dogs or the toddler involved if anyone has a fight. So toddlers are I would say one of the hardest stages for parents to get through with dogs. Again, we want to stick to minimal interaction where possible, especially no unsupervised interaction. Again, you shouldn't leave your children alone with your dogs ever, no matter how much you trust said dog and or child. But with toddlers, where we've got hands moving and quite often pressure going into hand movements that isn't necessary, like too much pressure, we want to make sure that we aren't letting that happen. We can start to have interactions that are very well supervised with mum and dad, but again, we want to make sure that we are controlling them as much as possible. Protected contact, again, remains your friend, especially whilst toddler is learning to crawl, learning to walk, learning to stand, things like that. Protected contact is going to be amazing at letting your dog witness that and witness this thing that was crawling or was just kind of a blob on the floor, now start to move, now start to reach for things, grab for things, scoot for things. It's a great way of your dog being able to witness that, but without your toddler/baby potentially using your dog as something to scoot against, to hold up, to try and stand against, and things like that. That can be somewhere where we get loads of problems coming in. And we want to make sure that your dog is comfortable. So always give your dog, especially when there's noise and movement involved, always give your dog the option to get up and walk away. So yes, we want to use protected contact, but let's say you've got a room and you want to have your baby one side. So in this room, the door is that way, and that side is the side I would have the baby on. So the side the window is on. You can't leave that way. So that would be where the baby or toddler is. And then I would have Pumbaa, because he's right here, I would have Pumbaa this side of the room, so this side where I am, and with the door open, so that if, yes, he's got protected contact, no, he doesn't have to interact with the baby directly, but he can choose to leave if he wants to. Forcing your dog into a situation with your baby is rarely going to end well, and is more likely to end in a bite than not. So always give your dog the option to leave if you can, and if you can't, give them as much space as you can. So if your dog is the other side of the room, try and keep your toddler away from the pen that's creating that protective contact, so that you're increasing the distance. If your dog comes forward, by all means, let them have a little, I was going to say let them have a sniff of each other through the fence, but let your dog sniff your toddler through the fence, and keep your toddler nice and still whilst they do so, and start to build it up that way. Make sure your dog does have the space to kind of move forwards and backwards, away or closer, as they wish to. When it comes to interactions with the dog, what we can do, provided the dog has shown no hesitancy or kind of concern, we can have one family member work the dog, keep the dog on lead, so we're not getting any jumping up or kind of pouncing or overexcited sniffing or anything like that. With toddler nice and calm, so not tired, not hungry or anything like that. You just want to have your toddler place their hand on yours, and you can stroke the dog with your toddler's hand on top of yours. Obviously, we want to be working this on kind of the toddler to child end versus the baby to toddler end of the age bracket. But that way your toddler can start to realize how much pressure is necessary when we're stroking dogs. And we can start to implement the rule, one hand is enough, two hands is too many. So that your dog always has a way, kind of no matter how small the dog is, if you're only touching them with one hand, they have 180 degrees to leave with. They don't have to, they're not feeling crowded or anything like that. We're not letting the child develop the habit of kind of possessing the dog's space. And your dog knows that there are plenty of avenues to leave should they wish to. Again, we want to make sure we're managing it as much as possible. So where you're feeding a toddler, there is nothing wrong with feeding a dog in the same room. Protected contact if you want to. It depends on how you're feeding toddler, or if they're having a bit of a stroppy day, you may wish to feed them in protected contact. If your toddler is very quickly teaching your dog bad food manners, which I see quite a lot in families, protected contact can prevent, unless your toddler learns to like fling food for the dog, can help to just maintain those table manners if that's something that you don't want developing into a problem later on. And again, when toddler is having reading time before bed, there's nothing wrong with having dog at the foot of the bed as well, or on the floor, not on toddler's bed, on the floor listening, and then the dog leaves with you when you're done. So again, we're aiming for nice calm relaxation. Anytime toddler is excited, we want to make sure that the dog is separated by protected contact, or is held by lead, held by another family member or something like that, just so we're not getting any kind of again, prey drive kicking in, or any overexcited, just bouncy, happy dog playtime, especially if the dog is bigger. The bigger a dog is, the more damage they can cause to a baby, no matter how friendly the intention is. Right. When it comes to children and dogs, there's a lot more that we can do. So we can start to introduce the child to the dog's life. We can start to bring them into the training scenario. I love introducing children to a dog's life via training because, and I'm talking about training the dog, not the child. Because we can start to, especially if we use something like tricks, we can train the child to teach the dog tricks. And tricks aren't behaviors that we care about necessarily. If your dog doesn't spin around in a circle, it's not the end of the world. If your dog doesn't come back, that is the end of the world, and you don't want a child in control of teaching your dog's recall. So pick behaviors you don't care about. Let your kids interact with them. Take them to training classes. If you've got a puppy, bring your kids along with you. Double check it's okay with the trainer, and check that they've got enough space. Obviously with coronavirus, we've had to limit class numbers, so that's one reason why children may be limited on attendance. But in normal times, we are more than happy for children to attend and to help coach them through the whole training process, especially for those trick behaviors where it's all fun and games and it can kind of be the kids' realm when it comes to teaching the dog. It's a great way for them to build their relationship, to build their understanding of one another. It can teach your dog some really cool tricks. It can give your kids a hobby for life. So if they really get into it, you can get trick titles. So you can have a nice certificate with your dog's name on it and your child's name on it. They get a little like rosette thing as well. And then there's the whole world of kind of heel work to music. If your kid really gets into it, they could be competing at crufts one day with their best mate. And it is such a cool thing for your kids to get involved in, especially if your dog and they love it. We can also implement red zones. Now, red zones mean stop, no kids allowed. And what I would recommend as red zones are the dog's bed. So you can either buy a red bed, or you can buy a blanket that is red and place that over the dog's bed. The dog's feeding area. So I would, if that's not a crate, or like a room that you can close the door to, I would, with red electrical tape, draw a rectangle around the bowl, but also that includes the dog's eating space. So if you've got a Great Dane, it would come really far out. So if, say, the bowl's here, it would come really far out. And when the dog is eating, you are not allowed within the red square. This is great if you've got a dog that's shown any sign of resource guarding as well. So if you've got a dog who either before, during the baby's presence did resource guard food, toys, anything like that, then this is a great thing to do for them. And it's also a nice, easy, if you've got visitors or guests or anything like that to the house, it's a nice, easy way of giving your dog their space when they're eating. I don't know about you, but I don't like people being near me and kind of touching me or like asking me, kind of pestering me when I'm really, really hungry and I just want my food. I'm probably going to turn around and be quite snappy then as well. So it's absolutely crucial that your dog gets the time to just eat their food by themselves without any interruption from anyone else. What else would we, if you've got a crate, cover that in a red blanket as well. That's a fantastic one. If you have a sofa that the dog is allowed on, I would be careful about allowing them onto the whole sofa, especially if you've got children. It's quite a busy household. If they have any kind of intention or any hesitancy over being woken up, or kind of sleeping on the sofa, you want to be careful that we're not getting into the habit of kids being near a sleeping dog on the sofa and starting to interact with that sleeping dog. There is a reason there's a phrase, let sleeping dogs lie. And it's because sleeping dogs don't want to be interrupted. I wouldn't want to be pounced on when I was asleep. And we want to make sure that actually we're not encouraging any of that to happen. So if you do allow your dogs on the sofa, maybe make it a rule that if they want to curl up and go to sleep, they either go to their bed or they go to their crate, or you have a sofa they have a cushion on the sofa that is covered with a red blanket, and that is the dog space. If they are on that sofa, no one else is allowed on that sofa with them unless it's an adult, and you know that you're not going to touch the dog and there is sufficient space for you to sit down next to them and not touch the dog. Any other areas that you might want to instill, especially if you I don't know all of your lifestyles, it's quite a generalized talk, but if there's anywhere that you think your dog should feasibly be left kind of to their own devices by themselves, make that a red zone and either stick electrical tape around it or try and cover it with a red blanket or something like that if you can. Absolutely no children allowed in red zones whatsoever. So if your dog has a pen, if they've got a crate, that's a no-go for kids zone. They can't put their hands in there. They're not allowed to change water or anything like that. That is an absolute, if the dog is in there, you leave it alone. And once that rule is kind of understood, you've got a lot more that you can use in order to start to encourage self-correction when it comes to the child's behavior towards the dog. They can go, oh, it's a red zone, so I'm not going to touch it. And you can then start to reinforce your child's behavior for acknowledging the red zone versus interacting with the dog whilst they're in a red zone area. Once you've got red zone set up, if you've got a dog who's got any form of resource guarding or anything like that, you can also encourage your dog to go to a red zone location. So if you give them a chew, they can go to their bed to have the chew. They can go in their crate to have the chew. They cannot jump on the sofa that is not a red zone and have that chew. That is when we pop in and we pop a treat on the dog's nose, lure them away, and you want this to be a high value treat. So it's preferably higher value than the chew they've got. Lure them to their bed, give them the chew on the bed and keep them there. If you have to keep doing that, then I would recommend crating them. So you can just simply pop them in there with the chew, close the crate door, or use management like a baby gate or something like that to keep them in an area where the kids aren't present so that they can enjoy their chew wherever they would like to. It's important that both dogs and children get time apart from one another, especially if they're tired or if the dog's in any pain or anything like that. Pain is a huge factor towards dogs developing behavior problems. And if your dog has hurt their leg, if they've got any form of elbow, hip dysplasia, they've been to the vets, make sure the kids really, really back off from them. They give them a solid kind of 48 hours to get over whatever it is. If it's a long-term problem, then you need to start implementing kind of scheduling routines so that you're not letting your kids get on top of your dogs. Like when we've got a bad back, we don't want kids jumping on us and things like that. It's exactly the same for our dogs. And like I said at the beginning of this talk, dogs kind of have, if they're pushed, the only way they can warn someone is with their teeth. And the best way of kind of avoiding that is preventing it as much as possible. So like I said, if your dog is in any pain, if they've had a totally routine operation, if they've had a sore tooth or anything like that, if they've been to the vets in any way, shape or form, for any kind of pain related behaviors, I would almost separate as much as you can, not in like a scary way, but just kind of, there's no need for the dog, especially if the dog kind of got no separation anxiety, leave them in a different room for a day, pop the kids to bed early and give the dog some kind of adult time to decompress, just chill out by themselves. And that could include walks as well. Walks with kids and dogs are great, but quite often the focus is on the kids versus the dog. And sometimes, especially if your dog's had a rough few kind of days, weeks, whatever, it can be nice for the dog just to have an adult only dog walk every now and again. And if you're struggling to fit that in, there are plenty of dog walkers who could help assist with that because it is quite a drain on your time. Again, when it comes to children, we want to be wary of excitable movement. So we want to be careful of running around too much, or the kids running around too much and the dog getting involved. So it would be a great idea to book in a session with a trainer to teach your dog that when people are running around like crazy animals, you sit and you stay still. And it's a great thing to teach your kids. There's the whole be a tree movement. So essentially, if a dog jumps up at you, or if a dog's doing something you don't like, you stand up, cross your arms, and just look up and call for help. Not scream for help, but just go, help me, please. And that's a great thing. If you teach your dog that this means sit, this whole position, stood up straight with your arms crossed, that means sit, then it's much easier for a parent to go over and intervene than if you've got a child who's continuing to run and a dog who's getting continually more and more excited because the child is still running. So try and implement those before they are needed. And if you're not sure when they're needed, then I would contact a trainer and go, is it time? Quite likely, if you're not sure, it probably is necessary now. And teach your dog to kind of balance their arousal. So excited situations quite often lead to excited dogs. If we can teach a dog that excitement means you stay calm, which means you get to be excited, then we've got a dog who can bounce from up and down really, really easily. If you've got a dog who once they're up, they stay up, that's much harder to manage with children than it is a dog who can bounce between the two. And there's nothing wrong with spending a few weeks training that prior to ever needing it. It's much better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Avoid teaching your children or allowing your children to ever pet a dog on the top of their head. Most dogs aren't keen on that. Pumbaa in particular doesn't like it, especially if you've got a dog with any form of ear issues. Like I said, pain is a huge problem. Most dogs, if you touch the top of their heads by design, you are touching their ears, and that's not comfortable for them. They don't like it, and that can be a reason why. Remember, I said that adults are mainly bitten on the hand, is because we've reached out and touched them in a place that they don't actually enjoy, and that can be the top of their head. Start to teach children to go for their dog's chest, approach them, show them that they're going to touch them, show them they don't have any food in their hands, and that's not necessarily a shove your hand in their face. It's just a look, bud, hands are empty, I'm going to stroke your chest, have a little rub, and start to teach your kids to rub for 10 and take your hand off. If the dog stays there, then you can rub for a little bit more, take your hand off. So it's 10 seconds and then check. If the dog walks away, you may not go and continue to stroke the dog. The dog has chosen to leave, therefore you leave the dog alone. So start to implement those rules, start nice and slow. So if you've got quite a young child, you want to kind of focus on red zones management. And if there's overexcitement, keep the dog on lead, or again, use protected contact. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having a little dog fence in the garden, so the kids can run around quite freely, but the dog can't necessarily get to them if it gets overexcited. And then as your kids get older, start to really reiterate, let sleeping dogs lie, maybe introduce the dog up on the sofa and let them sleep on the sofa at that point. Let the dog start to manage itself in exciting environments, but again, with your supervision, and start to introduce rules around petting and for how long we can pet. Right. So with teenagers, you tend to get teenagers who are either really super into the dog or really don't care. And if you've got the kind that really don't care, just ensure that you're instilling the rules of the red zones. They should be well and truly kind of in there by this point. You might be able to take some of the visual cues away. If you've got a teenager who is really super into the dog, then again, start to get them more involved in training. So again, if you're coming to training classes, if you're coming to one-to-ones, by all means, bring your teenagers with you if they're engaged and enjoying it. There's nothing I can easily tell when a teenager has been kind of forced to come to the training session and didn't sign up to come to the training session. That said, if you want to bring the teenagers anyway, please do. Nothing wrong with that. Ensure that if there are any problem areas, especially if you've got those teenage girls that like to have a cuddle, ensure that those red zones are really well in. Make sure that the sofa isn't becoming a problem. Make sure that any cuddle time is well supervised. And again, never leave teenagers alone with a dog. No matter how much you trust them, no matter how many years they've been okay together, it's not worth the risk. And you can start to implement consent training. So I talked about this a little bit in terms of with kids, we can pet for 10 seconds and then take our hands off. If the dog stays there, then we can continue petting for 10 seconds and repeat every 10 seconds. I do this with my adult dogs now. I'm 25. I've got 8-year-old dogs. They've never bitten me out of kind of stroking. Or kind of me overloading them with affection, but I still do this now, and it's so nice to see that my dogs continually come back for more attention versus going, actually no, I'm good. Whereas the days where I am perhaps a little bit, maybe I've had a really bad case and I just want to curl up with my dogs on the sofa, Pumbaa quite often will choose to move away from me, and I'll go, okay, fair enough. But when I implement consent and I'm very careful about that 10 seconds then stop, 10 seconds then stop, he will stay for much longer than if I just kind of keep going willy-nilly. So you can start to implement more consistent consent with Pumbaa. He is a dog who will quite happily sit next to you on the sofa and fall asleep. He may not want to be touched when he's sleeping though. And we have a system of, if he sat next to us and we're not sure if he wants to be touched, we hold our hand out like this. If he puts his paw on our hand, then we can stroke him. And again, that's 10 seconds. Then we ask for consent again. If his paw comes again, another 10 seconds, repeat. If his paw doesn't, we take our hands off and we don't touch him until he puts his paw back on our hand again. Teenagers are a little bit more able to start to use that and understand it. So that's a great thing to be doing with them and start to implement, especially if you've got a young girl that likes to cuddle and uses the dog as a bit of an emotional crutch, because being a teenage girl isn't easy. So that's definitely something to consider. And if you're having any problems implementing that sort of training, by all means get in touch with a trainer to do so. In summary, don't leave your kids alone with your dogs, regardless of the age of the child. Take it nice and slow. Don't push it for long, extended interactions. Don't push it for family photos or cute photos or anything like that. If you ask a dog trainer how many cute photos they've seen with kids, the answer will be not very many, and they've seen many more that has made them cringe and have to just quickly scuttle on before the bite happens. Set up as many kind of visual cues and environmental cues for your children as you can, especially as those children start to get more independent, start to get more movement, start to add in those red zones and ensure that it's kind of obvious as is possible that they should not be interacting with the dog right now. You can include them in that process. So if the crate is a red zone, get them to make a little sign for the crate that's Fido's kennel or something like that, and they can decorate it, and then they can use all the colors and things like that. So they can be involved in creating those red zones. They can make a sign per red zone: Fido's restaurant, Fido's kennel, Fido's bed, anything like that. It's a nice way for them to get involved, but with still reiterating the point of you can be involved in this, but you may not enter this zone without a parent present if the dog is in there. As they get older, as they start to get more excitable, teach your dog to cope with excitement up, excitement down, and being able to kind of come down after they have gone up. And set your dogs up for success. If you think they're going to jump on a child when they're running around, don't give them the opportunity. Keep them on lead, put them in protected contact, remove them from the situation. There's nothing wrong with that. Make sure your dogs have plenty of time away from your kids, and your kids have plenty of time away from your dogs, especially if it's quite a needy dog. They're quite sociable. They like cuddling. They like playing. Give your kids time away from them as well. And as they get older, make sure, especially if it's a teenage girl, that you are keeping that those red zones in place and keeping an eye on the situations that could potentially get a little bit hairy. That's me done for a general talk on kids and dogs in the house. If you have any specific questions, if you would like me to refer you to a colleague in your area to do one-to-one work with or classes with, by all means, please do shoot me an email at emma@pawbypawtraining.co.uk. I'm more than happy to help. If you let me know you've seen this video already before I go ahead and say, here, watch this video, that would be helpful. And yeah, if you have any further questions, I'm more than happy to answer them via email. Stop recording.